Hi, and welcome back to Smite Maths. In this video, we're going to run over the most mathematically optimal builds for OB18. I know it's been a while since my last video, and lots of things have changed. Spectral armor now reduces crit damage instead of crit chance, and tank items are skewed much more towards max health than they used to be. So let's take a look at how this will change the math builds for ADCs in Smite 2. As usual, let's quickly run through the best first item for an ADC. The height of each of these bars shows the DPS of each item. The higher the bar, the more damage the item does. From this, we can see that Avatar's Parachute is back at the top as the highest possible damage first item, with Sunbeam Bow and Tearfing closely behind. Still, we have to consider how expensive these items are, and when we account for cost, Sunbeam Bow shoots to the top, with Tearfing closely behind. This means these are the most cost-efficient first items you can buy. If you're a new player, Tearfing will be the safest first item. Sunbeam Bow and Bracer of the Abyss require slightly more skill to use, but if you've got more experience or like these items on the god you're playing, these two items have potential as a first item. Lernean Bow also appears as an okay option. If you like its active effect, feel free to build this as a first item. For the majority of players and gods, stick to Tearfing, but Sunbeam Bow definitely has its place, especially on gods like Medusa who can utilize it well. We also have to consider lifesteal this patch, as Devar's Gauntlet has had some pretty big buffs since my last video, and it now provides enough strength and sustain to be a meta first item this patch. This chart is showing Sunbeam Bow, Tearfing, Bracer, and Transcendence, as well as 4 lifesteal items. Devar's Gauntlet does appear very low here, but this graph only assumes it has 10 stacks. As it gains stacks, it becomes much more powerful. This graph is just showing that you should be aware if you have brought Devar's Gauntlet, while the enemy ADC has brought Sunbeam Bow or Tearfing. If you enjoy my content, please like, comment and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. Now let's move on to the best 2 item combinations. We don't see any big surprises, with Avatars, Sunbeam Bow and Tearfing all appearing in the best 2 item combinations. When we run the power curve analysis, Tearfing and Sunbeam Bow comes out on top, with Sunbeam Bow and Braggies a close second. These 2 combinations by far have the best power curves, while these combinations are okay if you've got a specific late game build in mind. Again, we need to consider lifesteal, so here are the top 10 combination of 2 items that contains at least 1 lifesteal item. I've put the 2 top damage combination of items here so you can have something to compare the lifesteal builds to. I've given Devar's Gauntlet 30 stacks here, and it now appears in the top combination of builds with lifesteal. Devar's Gauntlet is definitely now the best lifesteal item even just at 30 stacks, but it still lacks heavily when you consider its power curve when compared to Tearfing and Sunbeam Bow as a combination. When it comes to the best 3 item combinations, we are seeing more of the same. Tearfing or Sunbeam Bow are in every combination, and when we consider the power curve, these 3 combinations appear on top. So for an optimal build path, you want to build Sunbeam Bow and Tearfing in any order you want. Then you can build Odysseus's Bow, Bracer or Braggy's Harp depending on your playstyle, god and matchup. If you're building lifesteal, Devar's Gauntlet is now a clear favourite once you've stacked it up, with Devar's Gauntlet, Sunbeam Bow and Tearfing being the highest damage 3 item combination that contains lifesteal. When we consider power curve, this combination stays at the top, but Bracer and Braggies are still good contenders for a 3rd item here. Now, as we move on to the best 4 item combinations, we're looking at the total time it takes these builds to kill the whole enemy team. So the lower these builds appear, the better they are. Still, not much crit is appearing in the top combinations, with Tearfing, Sunbeam Bow, Odysseus Bow and Titan's Bane being the highest possible damage 4 items. When we run the power curve analysis, these 2 builds are shown to have the best power curves, and the crit build's expense really hinders their power curve potential. Considering the best 4 item combinations with lifesteal, Devar's Gauntlet has now beat every other lifesteal item now that it is fully stacked. Running the power curve analysis, it shows that these 3 builds are pretty much on par with each other, so build whichever one you like the most. Looking at 5 item combinations, we see a surprising lack of crit, especially Rage, which I have modelled to have 4 stacks when you have 5 items. Now, if you think that I should change the amount of stacks that Rage has at this point in the game, please let me know. The highest possible damage combination of items is Tearfing, Sunbeam Bow, Odysseus's Bow, Titan's Bane and Kins. When we run the power curve analysis, this build of Tearfing, Sunbeam Bow, Odysseus' Bow, Executioner and Kins is shown to have the best power curve. If you've built Devar's Gauntlet, there are no big surprises, with these two builds shown to have the best power curves when it comes to 5 item combinations. Now we can finally look at the best 6 item combinations, or in other words, the best late game builds. Of all of the 300,000 combinations of items I tested, these are the Hunter's Cowl builds that kill the whole enemy team in the fastest time. Let me quickly run through how to read these graphics. We have the total cost at the top. The combination of items are here, and these are in the order that you should build them. The total time to kill the whole enemy team is here, and here is the time to kill a squishy, a solo, and a support. I've also added these coloured numbers here. These show the percentage difference of this build's time to kill this enemy type versus the most optimal build against that enemy type. So the lower the number is, the better it is against that enemy type. For example, this says solo 0.0%, which means this is the optimal build against a solo laner. But it is 16.9% worse against a squishy than the optimal build against a squishy, and 1.3% worse against a support compared to the optimal build against a support. On the other end of the spectrum, this build is really good against squishy targets, but lacks heavily against supports, at 23.2% damage lost against supports, versus the best build against a support. Essentially, a green number means the build is good against that enemy type. A red number means that it's bad. And orange is in the middle. Using this, we can now see much more than just this build kills the whole enemy team the fastest. We can now easily see the makeup of this stat. So even though the second build here kills the whole enemy team slightly slower than the first build, we can see its makeup is much more spread out, being averagely good at killing all 3 enemy types. This third build is super strong against supports and solo laners, which drags down its total time to kill, but it is super lacking against squishy targets. You can now quickly use these coloured numbers to decide what build suits your playstyle and will be the best against the enemy team. When we look at the top Hunter's Cowl builds with lifesteal, we can see that crit is still shown to be viable, but not optimal. And this is when enemies don't have spectral. But if you're building lifesteal, these are the best items to pair with it. Now looking at the top Hunter's Cowl builds when both the enemy support and solo laner have spectral, crit has almost entirely been thrown out, with all of the optimal builds being quite lacking against squishies, but optimized for killing tanks quickly. And earlier we saw that these builds have optimal build paths. So if you want to build the safest build, where you're anticipating enemies buying spectral, these are the ones you want to go for. Of course, when tanks have spectral, the builds need kins and high attack speed to be effective, which is why crit is thrown out in favour of these other stats. Again, if you've gone for lifesteal, you want to be building yellow damage items if you anticipate enemy tanks building spectral armor. For sharpshooter's arrow against enemies without spectral, you want to build a lot of crit chance, but skipping rage or only building yellow damage items is completely viable. But you do run the risk that crit and lifesteal builds will become much less effective if enemies buy spectral armor. When enemies do build spectral, even sharpshooter's arrow can't make a full crit build viable, with the purple build having some crit but skipping out on rage. Of course, full crit builds won't be terrible, they will just be really slow at killing tanks, that it will be safer for you to build a full yellow damage build if you anticipate tanks building spectral. When we start to consider lifesteal, this effect is exaggerated, and crit is forced out of all of the top 5 builds. Even with sharpshooter's arrow as the starter item, only Demon Blade is appearing as a crit item in these builds, which is unsurprising given its synergy with kins because of its attack speed. And that's everything from me. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, comment and subscribe, and remember, don't guess, do the math.